Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Public school students and their teachers will be back in the classroom all over Idaho by the end of this week. Tonight, with State School Superintendent Jerry Evans, we'll review the status of Idaho's public schools. Good evening. Back to school time, of course, traditionally marks the unofficial end of summer and the unofficial beginning of the annual "how much money do we have to spend on education next year" game. By most accounts, Idaho's public school teachers at the moment, as they go back to school across the state, seem to be generally happy with the way the last session of the Idaho legislature dealt with them money-wise. But with the continual pressing demands on the state budget, many must be wondering how the next session of the legislature will treat them in the same regard. That's one issue we'll be discussing tonight with State School Superintendent Jerry Evans. We'll also be talking about what's called a career ladder. That's a concept also adopted by the last legislature that is designed to further compensate the very best Idaho public school teachers. The State Department of Education just tonight is holding the first of a series of hearings around the state on that career ladder concept. Mr. Evans, maybe that's an appropriate place for us to start. Maybe you could just give us a thumbnail sketch of what this career ladder means and what your eventual guidelines might contain.
It would have to be only a thumbnail sketch and only a guess at what the final rule and regulation might be, because we're just in the stages of developing those rules and regulations. However, in the legislative discussion and the meetings since that time, I've been forced to describe kind of a generic model of career ladders that perhaps would be helpful in understanding. Legislatures really said through the enactment of House Bill 475 that there should be ways for people who do more and for those who do their job better to be paid more than those who do not. So they provided in House Bill 475 some, I guess, minimum requirements that a career ladder plan must have. If, for instance, it says there must be at least 3 career paths. Now, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be 4 or 5 or 6, but it does mean that there would have to be at least 3. Perhaps they could be described as one path might be called professional teacher, a second path might be called senior teacher, and the third path might be called master teacher. There would be some higher academic requirement in order to get from one career path to another, and you could move from one career path based on the assumption of some additional duties and responsibilities. A teacher might take on the district-wide in-service training program responsibilities, or they might be involved in a curriculum writing project, or they might be involved in a number of activities kind of beyond the regular classroom. So a teacher who had more than just the academic requirement to get into the professional teacher might be in the senior teacher career path. They might be working beyond the classroom and working on those things beyond just their regular assignment, might even be on an extended contract. They would also have to meet some performance criteria in order to get from one career path to another. Then that senior teachers might simply represent the building. They could move into the master teacher by working on a district-wide basis. So the contract might be extended longer, the area of responsibility might be still broader, but again, there is an evaluated performance criteria that has to be met. So kind of the bottom line is that you can move from one career path to another based on some additional academic requirement or training, and the assumption of additional duties, responsibilities, or performance at a very high level. So that's basically what it is. It should open up the opportunity for much higher salaries for some teachers without opening up that higher salary level to all teachers.
Do you sense that there is still great concern on the part of teachers about just how this will be implemented?
Mark, as you talk to individual teachers, they're quite comfortable with the idea of some career ladder, some path that would differentiate between assignment, and they're not too uneasy even about the idea of evaluated performance. So when you're dealing with the career ladder plan itself, there seems to be kind of a general acceptance. When you move over into the fine detail and you begin talking about how individuals will be evaluated, what will the criteria for evaluation be, how will they be developed, who will be doing the evaluation, how often will it be done, over what period of time must this high level of performance be sustained, that's where the apprehension really begins to develop.
And these hearings that I mentioned, the first of which is in Twin Falls tonight, are designed to allow anybody who wants to have some input into how this should work.
That's right. We're really having these meetings all across the state for two reasons. One is to build a level of awareness in terms of what the provisions are that are in the law. It will give us an opportunity to explain in some detail what House Bill 475 really contains. Beyond that, it will give us the opportunity to harvest the concerns and the questions and the apprehensions that people have so that we can find a way to deal with them.
By one estimate already, that estimate from the Legislative Budget Office, the state budget is maybe $50 or $60 million out of balance looking into the next fiscal year, in part because of the money needed to implement this career ladder, also in part because of the second year of the teacher salary raises designed to bring Idaho teacher salaries up to the national average. Are we realistically, because of those two factors, looking at the need for a substantial amount of new revenue to implement this career ladder?
We are looking at a substantial increase in the appropriation. The career ladder plan, the whole career ladder concept, will not work unless there's an adequate salary base for all teachers. For those who do a satisfactory job or something just better than satisfactory, there still has to be an adequate salary. We have to talk about a level of compensation that will attract quality people into the profession, a level of compensation that will retain their services over a period of time, and a level that will also reward those who would do an outstanding job. And all of that rests upon attracting bright, capable people into the profession. So it's just critical that we have the second phase of that salary equity that was also in House Bill 475 in order to go along with the career ladder plan. If we don't have an adequate foundation upon which for all this to rest, we will have some real difficulty.
Are we then looking at another big fight over taxes and where to spend money in the next session of the legislature?
I'm not sure that fight is the proper word. It may be. I may be one willing to describe what goes on as a fight at the end of February or the end of March, who knows. But at this point, it seems to me that the legislature itself, through an interim study committee and then the work of the legislature, came up with House Bill 475. They recognized the need to put an adequate foundation under salaries in Idaho, and they recognize the need to reward those people who do more and who perform at a high level of service or performance more money. That was a legislative enactment. Came about as a result of considerable support on both sides of the political aisle. It wasn't something that came from the outside that just slipped through with one party's support. It really was a legislative enactment that had support of both parties, and I happen to be optimistic enough to think that there's commitment to see that it's funded. Yet I do recognize that we're facing some very uncertain financial times. Whether or not we're going to talk about a big tax increase, it's hard to say. With the initiative dealing with sales tax on groceries, the legislature may be forced to go back and look at this whole situation again. So it's for certain it's going to cost some money.
And it would be, I take it in your mind, a real breaking faith with teachers and I guess everybody who really cares about the public schools and believes that this step needed to be taken if the legislature doesn't follow through.
It would be a tremendous disappointment if we were unable to carry through the second step of salary equity and move on to a career ladder plan. I'm asked often by local administrators and teachers, Jerry, can you guarantee us that that 10 million plus, or whatever that number turns out to be, that it will take to fund the career ladders will be there when the legislature adjourns and goes home? Well, I can't make any such guarantee. I have to assume that there is good faith and that the legislature knew what it was doing, and they did bite off what amounts to a 2-year program. They understood full well in advance what the commitment and obligation for the second year was, and I'm proceeding as though they're going to meet that responsibility.
Let me ask you, paraphrase a question that President Reagan asks every once in a while. Are Idaho schools better off today than they were a year ago as a result of this legislation?
Mark, I cannot tell you that the first day of school, and today is the first day of school for many, many school students in Idaho, is that much better than it was just 1 year ago. We're talking about the investment in a program that takes time to see any real change. Those folks who think they can pass a law, set a higher level of appropriation 1 year, and the next year everything suddenly be improved are in for some disappointment. It's just a longer-term project than
There is that expectation on the part of a lot of folks.
That's one of my worries, is that people have the expectation of some kind of instantaneous solution. It's not going to work that way. We talk about attracting our share of the brightest and most capable students into the colleges of education. You know, it takes a time from the time they're attracted before they're trained and ultimately out into a school district. These are long-term goals, yet I think Idaho is well on its way towards some improvement. We're moving, you know, the class that enrolls this year will be the first class to meet the new state board mandated high school graduation requirements. We'll be under the new attendance policy and a number of those things. And I think you will begin to see some fairly significant improvement right away. Yet if we're looking at a giant increase in the SAT scores, I just don't think that's going to happen as a result of 1 year's appropriation.
Ultimately, will there be some quantitative way, or qualitative way, I should say, about measuring this? Will it be an increase in SAT scores, or will it be something like that maybe 5 years down the road we can point at and say, we made an investment of several $1 million back in 1983, and look at what happened, 84?
The answer to that is yes, we will be able to make that kind of a comparison. Along with the work of that committee last year came the pressure to set up some kind of a statewide assessment program to determine some level of achievement in the basic academic subjects, and I was asked a number of times, do we give some kind of an achievement test to all the students in Idaho at some grade level? And the answer was no. Some of our school districts use one test, another district down the road uses another, and on down the road still another. I could go to each of those districts and they would report we're always at grade level, we're at the national norm, we're slightly above, but I couldn't say there was a single instrument that all students took at any one grade level. So we are implementing this year a statewide assessment testing program, and it will be an achievement test. It will be given at the 11th grade level, and it will give us some benchmark or baseline data, so that we will be able to tell in 2 years or 3 years or on down the road how much improvement we have made that is measurable on some kind of a standardized achievement test.
I'm going to change the subject just a little bit. Unless you've been under a rock for a few months, you know that we're in the middle of a political campaign. I'm wondering how you as a Republican feel about the fact that the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers, the two big teacher groups nationally, have both endorsed the Democrat Walter Mondale for president. How do you feel about that?
Well, I wish they had not done so. I'm not sure they're able to to really tell where the effective leadership and where the solutions to their questions lie. I'm convinced that in this state we have political support on both sides of the aisle, and that's what it takes to put the program together and to make it operate at a quality level. It cannot be one party says this and the other party says the opposite. We are not going to build a strong system of pre-common schools in this country that way. Yet I'm pleased to see that education has been elevated in the political discussions because it has created a great public awareness and is adding greatly to the public understanding of what our needs are. And with that, I think will come eventually the public support that it takes to truly reform the system.
Let me give you one example why the NEA at least says it endorsed Mondale. And he says, of course, that President Reagan has made such drastic cuts in federal assistance to education that it's been very damaging. Is that true?
Well, you can go back and look at the numbers, and I think if you were to do that, you'll see that President Reagan has certainly reduced the rate at which these programs were increasing in their funding. It's hard to go back and see where specific programs have been cut back to a level lower than they were previously. Yet it's hard to put it all together because with the Reagan administration came a huge block grant program where some 28 categorical programs are now all lumped together, and the money is provided back to the states, and the states then can spend the money in any way they want as long as it's for one or more of the reasons that were described in those categorical programs. Now that has had a negative impact on our State Department of Education. Part of the funds that were lumped into that block grant, which does have an 80% pass-through requirement. 80% of those funds must flow right through to local school districts, were monies that used to go to the State Department of Education to strengthen state departments of education. So when that came about, it really created some budget problems for our own Department of Education in this state. And I've appealed to the legislature to provide state funding for some of the positions that were funded under our own Title V money. I've not been very successful in that. Yet I think the block grant is the way to go. I think it's a far more effective way to spend the money, to leave considerable discretion at the local school district level in terms of how best to apply that money to the needs of the students in that particular district.
So that's, I take it that would be one way that the way the money at least is allocated from the federal level has, what, hurt education in Idaho?
Well, you'd have to look at that from several different points of view. It has not helped our State Department because we've been forced to cut back some positions. If you were to go out to the local school district level, you would see that they've received more money than they were receiving under the categorical programs, and they have more flexibility in terms of how it's spent. So at one level it looks like a big minus, at the other level it looks like a great big plus.
Depends on which end you're sitting.
Yes, it certainly does.
Now again, as a Republican, Mr. Reagan talks a lot about how he has improved education, and the Secretary of Education, Terrell Bell, recently says that we've turned the corner in reversing this decline toward mediocrity. No kidding now. Has Mr. Reagan really done that as an educator?
It's really hard to see. It's hard for me to say this is something the President did or that the Secretary of Education did that automatically made everything better. But if you go back in Idaho's history, you'll see that we were struggling with our own Commission on Excellence. That commission was appointed well underway and almost to their final report before the Federal Commission was ever appointed. And when our report came out, didn't seem to have much credibility. Not too many folks paid any attention to it. When the National Commission came out with their report, A Nation at Risk, it almost slipped a foundation under the work that our own commission had done. Suddenly people were saying, what is the situation in Idaho and what should we be doing about it? And here we had in place a study, almost a ready-made plan to deal with those issues that were kind of questions in the federal report, and we had answers in our own report. So in that regard, you know, the activity of the National Commission and the work of the U.S. Department of Education were very helpful. It's kind of like they slipped a foundation under our work and gave it some credibility that it might not have otherwise had.
From a purely political standpoint, the merits of what is being done aside for a moment, is it good? You said it was good that we have inserted education into the political dialogue of the country, and I think most people would agree that that's a good thing. But is it good that the NEA, for example, is endorsing candidates when some people might draw the inference that, gee, all of our teachers are going to be voting for a Democrat for president, and that might not be a good thing? Same could be true if they'd endorsed the president.
Yeah, I would like to think that politics were left to the individual. And one has to understand that the NEA works very hard to present itself as a professional association. But when you get right down to the kind of the hard, cold facts, they are the union. And it's hard to say that the union activities, which are largely teacher welfare oriented, are really interested in the children and the educational programs. Yet I can't say that they're enemies either. I'm not comfortable with the NEA's endorsement. I think they made a mistake. I wish they had stayed out of it, but that's not they're not going to grant me my wish.
There's another issue that at least in many people's mind is linked to the whole discussion of education, and that's prayer in schools. How do you feel about that?
Well, it has been around as a subject that has been discussed for a long, long time. And when our forefathers really wrote the Constitution, they were very, very careful to provide for separation of church and state. And that is a constitutional separation at the federal level, and in our own state it is even a more clear separation. Our state constitution is much more specific than is our national constitution on that issue. I do not see a thing in the world wrong with children praying in school. But when we move into a situation where the state might prescribe the prayer for all children, we're getting dangerously close to the state's recognition or sanction of one particular religion. And I think our forefathers were very wise in the restrictions that they provided for us.
As a practical matter, there is nothing to keep any student before a math test or any other time from praying right now, is there?
That's right. I'm confronted oftentimes with people who say, why has God been expelled from our schools, and why is it illegal for children to pray in school? And I counter that by saying, you know, God has not been expelled from our schools, and children can pray in school now, individually. It's only when, through their teacher, an agent of the state, that the state is providing the religious instruction, that we have constitutional problems. So that is one where the President and I have some real difference of opinion, and it's one that ultimately will be solved in the courts. I'm sure it will be dealt with in the legislatures across the country and in our Congress, but the ultimate and final answer will rest with the courts.
Another subject, you mentioned that 90% attendance rule a moment ago. There's been a great, I think fair to say, a great deal of controversy about that, maybe more than almost any other issue in the last couple of years in the education area. In essence, it requires that students spend what, 90% of all their time in the classroom as opposed to away from the classroom engaged in extracurricular activities or whatever. There's no debate about the fact that that is the rule, and that will be the way schools will operate in Idaho, but I'm wondering how are the schools adapting to that? Is there still a lot of reluctance?
Mark, I've probably had more hide taken off my back over the 90% attendance rule than anything else I've done since I've been state superintendent. But it is the rule now. It has been adopted by the board, and the school districts are adopting local policy to accommodate the new state board rule. It is my judgment as of today that most of the school districts are trying to find a way to implement that rule in their district in such a way that it's not going to create any real hardship, but still try to recognize the spirit and intent of the rule. And that is something that many folks have missed, and that is we're trying to say that class time is important, instructional time should be uninterrupted, and as few intrusions into the school day as possible should be the rule for our schools. And that's really what the 90% attendance rule is all about. Yet there is some local discretion where a local board can determine if a student has been gone more than 10% of the time, if there are extraordinary circumstances which should warrant their going ahead with the award of credit. It can still be done. The bottom line is we're saying students should be in class, instructional time is important, and uninterrupted instructional time is what we're after.
A couple of other subjects real quick before our time runs out. About 100 schools in the state of New Jersey were prevented from opening last week by your counterpart there because of asbestos problems in the schools. We've had some problems in Idaho schools. In fact, in Sandpoint just last week there was a bond issue approved to remove asbestos from schools there. Are those problems with asbestos being addressed to your satisfaction?
They are being addressed. One never knows whether the inspections that are being conducted are the kind that the level and sophistication that they should be, but our schools are struggling very hard with the inspection requirement, with the encapsulation requirement, and the removal requirements. Just last spring, we had a series of regional meetings where we met with the school administrators so that people from the Department of Education and EPA went out together to work cooperatively with the schools to deal with this program, and we think we're making some real headway.
As kids go back to school this week, should their parents be worried about that?
Well, I can't assure them that in every school district, in every situation, that it's totally 100% taken care of. But the school districts are working very hard to see that that is the case. And I think we're doing about as much as reasonable people can be expected to do.
Just a minute left. There's a new study out last week recommending major revamping in the way teachers are trained, including a national proficiency exam for those who want to be teachers. Is that a good idea?
Mark, our own Commission on Excellence, as you will recall, suggested that we might have some kind of entrance requirement for people who are either entering into the colleges of education, normally upper division coursework, or as a condition for certification. We're wrestling with that question right now. I think Idaho soon will have some kind of a test that will either have to be passed before they enter into the upper division coursework in the teacher training programs, or as a condition for certification. And those efforts are going ahead with my blessing.
Well, the report was critical of what they called diploma mills, colleges that just turn out teachers without much control. Is that a problem?
Well, I don't think it's as big a problem in Idaho as it is many places. We have looked, for instance, the national statistics say we recruit from the bottom 1/3 of the class, those folks who go into the colleges of education. Our Idaho statistics would indicate that we're not in that situation, so we're better than that.
Sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt. We'll have to leave it there. Mr. Evans, thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate it. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.